He understood that modeling the incoherent and vertiginous matter of which dreams are composed was the most difficult task that a man could undertake, even though he should penetrate all the enigmas of a superior and inferior order, much more difficult than weaving a rope out of sand or coining the faceless wind. He swore he would forget the enormous hallucination which had thrown him off at first, and he sought out another method of work. Before putting it into execution, he spent a month recovering his strength, which had been squandered by his delirium. He abandoned all premeditation of dreaming, and almost immediately succeeded in sleeping a reasonable part of each day. The few times that he had dreams during this period, he paid no attention to them. Before resuming his task, he waited until the moon's disk was perfect. Then, in the afternoon, he purified himself in the waters of the river, worshipped the planetary gods, pronounced the prescribed syllables of a mighty name, and went to sleep. He dreamed almost immediately, with his heart throbbing. He dreamed that it was warm, secret, about the size of a clenched fist, and of a garnet color, within the penumbra of a human body as yet without face or sex. During 14 lucid nights, he dreamt of it with meticulous love. Every night he perceived it more clearly. He did not touch it. He only permitted himself to witness it, to observe it, and occasionally to rectify it with a glance. He perceived it and lived it from all angles and distances. On the 14th night, he lightly touched the pulmonary artery with his index finger, then the whole heart, outside and inside. He was satisfied with the examination. He deliberately did not dream for an entire night. He took up the heart again, invoked the name of a planet, and undertook the vision of another of the principal organs. Within a year, he had come to the skeleton and the eyelids. The innumerable hair was perhaps the most difficult task. In the end, he dreamed an entire man, a young man, but one who did not sit up or talk, who was unable to open his eyes. Night after night, the man dreamt him asleep. In the Gnostic cosmogonies, demiurges fashion a red atom who cannot stand. As clumsy, crude, and elemental as this atom of dust was the atom of dreams forged by the wizard's knights. One afternoon, the man almost destroyed his entire work, but then changed his mind. It would have been better if he had destroyed it. When he had exhausted all supplications to the deities of earth, he threw himself at the feet of the effigy, which was perhaps a tiger or perhaps a colt, and implored its unknown help. That evening, at twilight, he dreamt of the statue. He dreamt it was alive, tremulous. It was not an atrocious bastard of a tiger and a colt, but at the same time these two fiery creatures, and also a bull, arose and a storm. This multiple god revealed to him that his earthly name was Fire, and that in this circular temple, and others like it, people had once made sacrifices to him and worshipped him, and that he would magically animate the dreamed phantom in such a way that all creatures, except fire itself and the dreamer, would believe to be a man of flesh and blood. He commanded that once this man had been instructed in all the rites, he should be sent to the other ruined temple whose pyramids were still standing downstream, so that some voice would glorify him in that deserted edifice. In the dream of the man that dreamed, the dreamed one awoke. The wizard carried out the orders he had been given. He devoted a certain length of time, which proved to be 2 years, to instructing him in the mysteries of the universe and the cult of fire. Secretly, he was pained at the idea of being separated from him. On the pretext of pedagogical necessity, each day he increased the number of hours dedicated to dreaming. He also remade the right shoulder, which was somewhat defective. At times he was disturbed by the impression that all this had already happened. In general, his days were happy. When he closed his eyes, he thought, "Now I will be with my son." Or more rarely, "The son I have engendered is waiting for me and will not exist if I do not go to him." Gradually, he began accustoming him to reality. Once he ordered him to place a flag on a faraway peak. The next day the flag was fluttering on the peak. He tried other analogous experiments, each time more audacious. With a certain bitterness, he understood that his son was ready to be born, and perhaps impatient. That night he kissed him for the first time and sent him off to the other temple whose remains were turning white downstream, across many miles of inextricable jungles and marshes. Before doing this, and so that his son should never know that he was a phantom, so that he should think himself a man like any other, he destroyed in him all memory of his years of apprenticeship. His victory and peace became blurred with boredom. In the twilight times of dusk and dawn, he would prostrate himself before the stone figure, perhaps imagining his unreal son carrying out identical rites in other circular ruins downstream. At night he no longer dreamed, or dreamed as any man does. His perceptions of the sounds and forms of the universe became somewhat pallid. His absent son was being nourished by these diminutions of his soul. The purpose of his life had been fulfilled. The man remained in a kind of ecstasy. After a certain time, which some chronicles prefer to compute in years and others in decades, 2 oarsmen awoke him at midnight. He could not see their faces, but they spoke to him of a charmed man in a temple of the north, capable of walking on fire without burning himself. The wizard suddenly remembered the words of the god. He remembered that of all the creatures of the people of the earth, fire was the only one who knew his son to be a phantom. This memory, which at first calmed him, ended by tormenting him. He feared lest his son should meditate on the abnormal privilege and by some means find out he was a mere simulacrum. Not to be a man, to be a projection of another man's dreams. What an incomparable humiliation. What madness! Any father is interested in the sons he has procreated, out of the mere confusion of happiness. It was natural that the wizard should fear for the future of the son, whom he thought out entrail by entrail, feature by feature, in 1,001 secret nights. His misgivings ended abruptly, but not without certain forewarnings. First, after a long drought, a remote cloud, as light as a bird, appeared on a hill. Then, toward the south, the sky took on the rose-colored of leopard's gums. Then came clouds of smoke which rusted the metal of the nights. Afterwards came the panic-stricken flight of wild animals. For what had happened many centuries before was repeating itself. The ruins of the sanctuary of the god of fire was destroyed by fire. In a dawn without birds, the wizard saw the concentric fire licking the walls. For a moment, he thought of taking refuge in the water, but then he understood that death was coming to crown his old age and absolve him from his labors. He walked toward the sheets of flame. They did not bite his flesh. They caressed him and flooded him without heat or combustion, with relief, with humiliation, with terror. He understood that he also was an illusion, that someone else was dreaming him. And there you have it. It's a very beautiful story by Jorge Luis Borges. Again, that was The Circular Ruin from the collection of short stories entitled Labyrinths. And I love the way that, as I said before, that Borges deals with objective reality or the lack thereof. And I also love his exploration of the idea of the simulacrum. That is to say, a copy without presence of an original. And interestingly enough, Borges was very interested in Gnostic mythology, the idea that all people are in some fashion asleep or ignorant of the truth of the world around them, and that every person must strive for an awakening, kind of a self-knowledge that brings them to understand the truth of their circumstances. A lot of his writing is very similar to the work of a French philosopher named Jean Baudrillard, who wrote a book called Simulacra and Simulation. So if you're at all interested in this concept that he's playing with here, that's a great place to start. And interestingly enough, I'll just leave with this final thought, that if you're a fan of The Matrix, the Wachowski brothers were very influenced by Borges' writing, and this was one of the stories that they read when they were kind of forming the germ of the idea of this Matrix world, this artificially created reality that existed solely within the mind of the people that were imprisoned by it. So I hope you enjoyed this reading, and thank you for listening.